The Western anime community doesn't understand shonen. Generally speaking, there's a lot of confusion on what it even is, its appeal, and where it's going. That's why 3 years ago, me and a few friends decided to answer these questions definitively. This resulted in an initiative called the Shonen Project, and subsequently, the creation of this YouTube channel. One way we seek to spread our discoveries is with a new series, Shonen Trope Talk. Similar to overly sarcastic productions or trope anatomy style videos, except for the fact these are about shonen, so they're automatically cooler. These are the tropes that help define shonen, and help it to communicate its themes better than nearly anything else. Today we will be looking at one very interesting trope that is a staple of both sport and battle anime and manga, animal instincts. Animal instincts is a combat trope based around prediction. All people are capable of reading situations at varying levels of speed and making an appropriate judgment call. Animal instincts is a skill that allows the user to subconsciously react effectively based on muscle memory and inborn responses to stimuli. In scientific terms, it's the application of a high capacity for fluid reasoning. In simple terms, you act more like an animal than a human being. This is hands down one of my favorite tropes ever, because not only does it speak to a sensation that the human race has been fascinated with for as long as we've been around, but it's also just plain badass to see, and rarely fails to be executed poorly given its deceptively simple nature. The reason we can have a trope like animal instincts is because of the two different ways Homo sapiens process information. You might have heard this phrase as intuition, system 1, and reasoning, system 2, and Daniel Kahneman's thinking fast and slow. You may have also seen the metaphor of the reasoning or conscious brain being a person riding the unconscious or elephant brain, and that you have to speak to the elephant if you want to convince someone, as it's the emotional or elephant part of the brain that's really in control. For those unfamiliar, the quickest and easiest way to explain it is that thinking is hard. It requires energy, and that's something we're programmed to conserve. As a result, the vast majority of our decisions are made without us really reasoning it through. But on the plus side, we can decide things quickly. In addition, as stated at the beginning, animal instincts is a combat trope. And typically speaking, in combat, you don't want to spend an hour thinking about all the logistics and consequences of how you'll slash your sword. While strategy is important to consider when fighting, as we'll see later, speed can be the deciding factor. One's senses are always picking up cues in the environment and subconsciously evaluating their relevance. The conscious part of our brain was the last to evolve, and so it can handle the least strain of any part. Your eyes, ears, nose, and many other parts are always taking in information that gets filtered out before reaching the conscious. So you can think of animal instincts as the opposite of the unlocking 100% of your brain myth. Instead of all your brain becoming an instrument for conscious thought, it is the conscious part of your brain that makes even more room for the unconscious to run wild, to complete a task. In this case, winning a fight. If you ever had a bad feeling that you acted on and it turned out to be correct, just multiply that a little and you basically have animal instincts in a nutshell. How animal instincts is applied. The appeal of combat tropes lie in how they both help and hinder characters, while also revealing aspects of their personality via action, in addition to being hype. Many interesting narrative trends have formed around animal instincts, and the strategic implications of such an ability have been even more interesting to ponder and witness. On the characterization front, animal instincts are linked with simplicity, both in goals and methods. This is most commonly matched with a natural aesthetic to the character. Living in the wild and being constantly exposed to nature puts the animal part of animal instincts at the forefront. Traditional animal traits like a hyper-sharp nose, picking up on weather changes, and boosted senses also generally apply. A great example is Gone Freaks of Hunter x Hunter, who has all of these traits and is referred to in-universe as being simplistic, unrefined, a pure-hearted boy. D&D fans might also recognize the barbarian skill, Danger Sense, as being related. The brain was developed for movement, learning how to find food, escaping and avoiding predators, interacting in tribes. All of these would require learning specific movements and preparing for unforeseen circumstances. This survival of the fittest environment sharpened our natural abilities. And as Yuval Harari points out in his book Sapiens, our ancestors on an individual level were probably smarter than us as a result. This is the default state of most of the main characters in Toriko. Closely intertwined with a connection with nature is the idea of innocence or pure-heartedness, for which the term shonen refers to in regard to young boys. Pure-heartedness can be understood as having your experiences defined solely by a singular drive, experience, or an idea. This kind of innocence comes into play more often, as it's a lot more workable narrative-wise. Take for example characters with animal instincts in Kuroko no Basket, Kagami Taiga, Aomine Daiki, Shinji Kogane, Kotaro Hayama. Present in each case is a rather simplistic core personality, and a passion for basketball being central to their character. The series takes it a step further and compares them all to specific animals as well. A tiger for Taiga, a cheetah for Hayama, a black panther for Aomine, and a kitty for Kogane, cause he's soft. But it's not just individual one-on-one battles for which animal instincts can play a significant role. Entire battles can be enveloped in animal machinations, as seen in the manga about Chinese unification, Kingdom. In the manga Kingdom, there exist two established types of generals that lead armies. There are strategic generals who rely on sequential reasoning and heuristics to win, and there are instinctual generals who instead use intuition to fight wars. While you probably won't see this division in real-life military engagements anymore due to how wars become so machined, meaning the human elements are coming to matter less and less, in the past, the battles between these types and the outcomes would define whole eras. Their distinct tactics make them easy to tell apart for those experienced in combat. Strategic types act as you expect. Battle plans are textbooked and well laid out. Troop formations are purposeful. Every possible move is accounted for within the scope of their available information and intelligence. Instinctual generals are less likely to employ such tactics. Troops may be sent out in a more haphazard manner. Victory may be achieved by the general feeling out the opponent in the engagement, or relying on luck or bravado to win the day. This is not to say an instinctual general does not have a base understanding of tactics. Far from it. Their conceptual understanding can be quite advanced. It is just the unconventional and predictive attacks of an instinctual general can stop a strategic general every move faster than they can come up with countermeasures. And so that is what they come to rely on. The off-the-cuff nature of their skills and their rarity creates a potent double whammy. In fact, the rarity of instinctual generals in Kingdom supports Kuroko no Basket's diagnosis of animal instincts. Everyone is born with it and they lose it when they grow up, overlaps well with the relative lack in numbers. Additionally, they're the guys who make it in the world where the fittest survive, pops up in the backstories of Shin and Dukayo. Shin was a child who'd always known hardship for the majority of his life, and Dukayo's life was steeped in war for as long as he can remember. Both are defined by a very singular experience. And in this context, it makes perfect sense that those who survive war the most gain an aptitude for war that can come off like an animal in its element. Shonen also has another name for animal instincts that I feel is proper to mention here, called woman's intuition. While functionally the same in many aspects, there's also a greater focus on reading social situations, and predicting how opponents will act and develop in the near future. Momoi Satsuki from Kuroko no Basket, Kuwabara's sister Shizuru in Yu Yu Hakusho, Machi in Hunter x Hunter, and Saber from the Fate series are all wonderful examples. Momoi uses her abilities almost cheekily, but virtually functions as a supercomputer in practice, completely reading players and what they'll do in any given situation. This fits both her character and her plight, being friends with players of demonic strength that mere prediction cannot stop, and an unreadable phantom for a lover, at least in our minds. Shizuru's spirit awareness is basically the Danny Phantom version of animal instincts, and it's implied that not only does it run in the family to an extent, but also that Kuwabara is so strong because of his sister being a big influence on it. Woman's intuition taken to the extreme gives us Machi's hunches, which reportedly are so accurate that none of the spiders can even bother to refute them and take them at face value. And Saber's skill is literally rank A instinct, and the description reads exactly as we have described animal instinct. Of course, if anyone wants to argue fate is not shonen, we can always settle it in a boxing match. Jokes aside, it's clear to me that girl power is very much a thing in the shonen aesthetic. Drawbacks of animal instinct. Of course, everything in life has a flip side, so to conclude, let us examine how this trope interacts with some other skills, its more negative aspects, and where it can develop in the future. For as hype and useful animal instincts can be, it's important to note that it comes with a degree of unreliability. This is a trope that scales directly with the user's experience in what they're doing. Therefore, it isn't a given it will pull through, especially if a person is new to using it. It may also activate too late, or not at all, depending on how good the opponent is at covering their tracks, in addition to the user's experience. As potent as the ability can be in a crunch, to paraphrase Machiavelli, he who depends on fortune alone is ruined when fortune changes. In battle, consistency is more important the longer a fight lasts, and thus, depending on strategic types in war tends to pay off more often. Hypothetically speaking, one could foresee a scenario of an animal instinct user being matched up against someone with planning capabilities that far outstrip their senses. A chess master or someone with the ability of future sight could predict and throw off an animal instinct user with baiting and feints. This strategy is exceptionally potent when you consider most animal instinct users are usually quick-tempered and lacking in self-awareness. Of course, the single coolest thing about animal instincts is that at its peak, there is a method to overwhelm future sight. This is extremely rare, even in fiction. This is assuming actual magic isn't the basis of the future sight, but rather relies on the absorption of huge amounts of data and the use of flawless logic to restrict the movements of the opposition. The pinnacle example is during the Kagami vs Akashi battle, in which Kagami's animal instincts allowed him to develop the potential for every single move he could take to be successful, or otherwise to be too dangerous to be countered. This in turn made Akashi take in all those possibilities as well, thus invoking the freeze response of the flight, fight, freeze mechanism of which every person is subjected to during an adrenaline rush. It was one of the single coolest moments in anime history, needless to say. For those who had trouble understanding what I just stated, consider the phenomenon of conditioning in fighting games. Getting consistently outmaneuvered can have a damaging effect on someone's thought process. Moves that a person would usually go for suddenly become taboo, as the opponent would counter, or see it coming. The player becomes overstimulated with emotions and trying to think through everything, in effect relying totally on the human writer instead of the elephant, to refer back to the earlier used metaphor. Invoking the freeze response is potentially the most interesting aspect of animal instincts, because it basically is the process of going so deep into your animal nature, you cause the opposite reaction in your opponent, as if they're literally trying to use 100% of their brain, like such a thing isn't a myth. Animal instincts itself can have a varying success rate, but whether the move can be consistently countered is irrelevant. It's fear that stills one step, and can lead them open to potentially even worse attacks than they would have had to endure had they just acted. Fear is typically a rational aversion to harm, but a core weakness in humanity is how it can be stoked intellectually, and in this case, ironically via the opponent acting more like an animal. The one thing that brings me back to Shonen Jump time and time again is their innovation. They pass the baton to the next generation. A great example relevant here being the Crocodile Basket author being an editor for the Hinamaru Zumo author. My personal problems with part 2 of Hinamaru 180ing its previous themes, and the horrid anime adaptation aside, the series demonstrates Jump willingness to break its own molds, succeed the standards it set for itself so that it never becomes irrelevant. I am of course talking about the evolution of animal instincts.
Killer instincts.
Given that Hinamaru is the first innovator of this, there's little to go on currently, but it's defined quite well. Naturally, it works similar to animal instincts in the most important ways. Similarities include it being a passive skill, and retaining the prerequisite of purity. The main differences lie in the fact that killer instincts comes more from a desire for victory, as opposed to a desire for survival, and the fact that it's a trope based around perception, not prediction. In a sense, killer instincts can be thought of as a more offensive version to animal instincts. Animal instincts in practice are a primarily defensive ability. The ability requires someone or something to take the initiative, and then the user of the ability will seek to capitalize on the confusion and the time difference between System 1 and System 2 of thinking. Contrast this with killer instincts, which has the user seeking to capitalize on the opponent's inherent weakness and strike immediately. Time is still a factor, but the time difference is creative in killer instinct's ability to discern weak points at an eye's glance, without the need to feel out their opponent. You could say that in a sense, animal instincts is the path of the survivor, while killer instincts is the path of the striver. It distinguishes itself from animal instincts aesthetically by tapping into the idea of the king of humans, rather than the king of the wilderness. It is my sincere hope that other series will begin to implement it, more along with animal instincts, and even the zone from Crocodile Basket. Thank you for watching, and I hope you subscribe and hit the bell, because we already have another Shonen Trope talk planned on Genius. I'd like to also shout out our 2 newest patrons, RaccoonJS and Dizo. I'm incredibly grateful for your support, and honestly I was completely caught off guard because I haven't even plugged the Patreon yet except for like one offhanded link on the channel page. To quickly go over the details, there's only one tier, and that's for $1 minimum. With only that much, you'll get your name written at the end of every longer video, along with some exclusive written content and earlier access to blog posts. Any support is appreciated.